Thanks, John. Yeah, he and I were talking, and I told him that I had a full refrigerator of craft beers at my house, and he seemed to like that. They were distributed through his distributors. So um, I'm really honored to be here. It's a little early for me, but I'm up. I had a lot of orange juice. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I got a lot of orange juice in me. And I wanted to basically show you what a real live book collector's like. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, and then I'd like to tell some stories that have happened in my collecting that I think you'll be interested in hearing. I got my start at the Ransom Center is where I got interested in book collecting. I'd always been a reader. I'd always collected things as a kid. I had stamps, coins, baseball cards, even beer cans. But that's a different story altogether. So I matured when I got to college, so to speak, and when I was at the Ransom Center, which most of you know what that is, but that is the rare book library for the University of Texas, the main one. There's a lot of good books there, but that's the big library. I was fortunate in graduate school to get an internship there, and it was, like John said, the passion started there, and there were a lot of passionate book people there, and I always liked acquisitions. And so what sparked my collecting of Latin American literature was I took a world literature class, and I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is a famous Colombian author and novelist, passed away recently, a Nobel Prize winner. But at that time, I didn't know all that. I just liked his short stories. And I was in a half-price books in Austin, and I bought a couple of his books, first printings in the English translation. And I said, I kind of like collecting this stuff. And things kind of went from there. He was the first person I collected, and by the time 2 or 3 years had passed, I started collecting the whole genre of Latin American literature in the 20th century. And now that collection has literally hundreds of authors represented, and I have about 2,500 volumes in that collection, both English translation and Spanish originals. My other collection, that's just my secondary collection. My other collection, I was working in the book trade there in college and shortly thereafter for Dorothy Sloan, prominent Texana and Western Americana dealer that resides in Llano now, but she was in Austin. And she was a veteran even at that point and very knowledgeable and very helpful to me. I got to sit next to her for probably a year cataloging various collections. And I absorbed a lot of her book knowledge, or at least as much as I could, and listened to her stories and her encouragement. And then I also met many Texas dealers during that time, such as Michael Heaston, Kevin McDonald, Michael Vinson, Tom Taylor, Michael Parrish of the Jenkins Company, other bookmen too, a lot of them involved in TSHA, like Al Lohman, Bill and David Holman, and also Jenkins Garrett. I got to know him a little bit. So I didn't realize it at the time, but at my age and just starting out, I really was immersed quickly in the field. In the mid-'90s, after I'd been in Austin and working at the Ransom Center and doing some other things, I had an opportunity to go out to the auction house on the West Coast, Butterfield and Butterfield. It's like a smaller version of Sotheby's or Christie's, and the book department hired me. And shortly thereafter, the director quit, and all of a sudden, I was the director of the book department at the ripe old age of 25 or 26, and we had 3 employees working with me, and by the time we were done, we were running a few $1 million a year through that department. And I was there a few years, and I was telling John, I enjoyed selling books, but at heart, I was a collector. And I had a chance to come back to Houston and work in the family real estate business. And so I said, let's try that. The West Coast gets kind of expensive, too, out there in the Bay Area. So I came back 18 years ago. That's my profession, but my passion is books. So one of the things, the book trade collection that I have, let me finish that. Book trade, it's the history of book collecting, bibliography, books about books. I started reading about the history of the book trade because I was so involved with all the dealers. And I began to find special copies, inscribed copies, association copies. A lot of things I have, like the famous/infamous Johnny Jenkins, I have a lot of material of his in my collection. And Thomas Streeter, who is a famous Texas collector, Frank Dobie. So that collection is much ongoing and has probably 3,000 volumes in it now. I also collect a few other things. I have some straightforward Texana that I couldn't resist, some maps, the Mexican illustrator Miguel Covarrubias, and also some miscellaneous author collections. But John and I, when we were talking about this, I started in 1989 buying my first books, and I feel kind of fortunate looking back on that because this was pre-internet. This was before the whole book world changed. And so when I first started, there was no internet book selling. Bookseller catalogs were the primary source of rare books. The main trade magazine, some of you may remember this, was A.B. Bookman. That was a weekly trade magazine. And local bookstores were much more prominent in terms of finding material. And then the dealers, this still happens, but it was I think, more prominent too. The dealers learned your wants and they would quote you material. And so I kind of bridged the gap. I got to see the transition. But early on, the bookseller catalogs, they're excellent learning tools. And when I was at the Ransom Center, Dr. Staley, the director, who was a big book collector himself, he knew, even though I was wet behind the ears, that I had a bent for acquisitions. So he said, Kurt, I want you to read through all the bookseller catalogs that come into the library. He says, there's only one thing you need to know. I get to read them first. And I said, okay, yes, sir, yes, sir. And so I knew where his mailbox was, and there were 6, 8, 10 catalogs coming in a day. I come in one day, and he's running late. He's at a meeting or something, and his secretary is over to the side, and I don't think she was looking at me. I found out later she was. I walk over to his mailbox, and I pull out the catalogs. I go, well, I'll just read them real quick and put them back in. So I take him down the hall to a vacant office, and I'm sitting in there, and before you know it, I lose track of time. And about 30 minutes later, I hear this. It was loud. Tom Staley, if any of you met him, he's a little Napoleon-like guy, very outspoken. I hear, Zimmerman! Zimmerman, where are you? Where's my catalogs? And he came down and he looked at me sternly and he chastised me, but he had that little twinkle in his eye, and he says, just don't do that again. And full circle on book catalogs, my friend John Payne, who is in Austin, he is a full-time appraiser and is a bookman. He is writing a book on the history of bookseller catalogs. No one has ever done a book on them before. And he asked me to write the introduction. So I feel like I've come full circle from those days. Now, a couple of things, too, in the pre-internet, I call it the pre-internet book world. I think as a collector, all collectors that are passionate are proactive, but I think you had to be a little more proactive then because things didn't just come to you online. One thing I did, I was an impecunious collector. You guys will appreciate this. I was operating on a very limited budget, but student loan money was available, so I used a lot of that for my first book purchases. No, I spent 10 years paying those off, but anyway, worked out all right. I went over, I was collecting Garcia Marquez, first author to collect. I made a short checklist of his works, and I went over to the Benson Library at the University of Texas, which is the Latin American library, and I'd become familiar with those holdings. I said, they get their books from sources down in Latin America. I went to the librarian, I said, who do you guys buy your books from down there? And I told him what I was trying to do. I got the name of the bookseller. I wrote a letter to them, and I made sure to mention I was at the University of Texas, and sent a short list of Garcia Marquez titles. Nothing happened for a month or two, and all of a sudden a package shows up. It was wrapped in craft paper and string tied. No padding, no box, nothing, and it was from Colombia. And when you get packages from Colombia back then, people got a little suspicious, but that was all right. That's right. So I took it I was living in a little duplex, and I still remember this. I cut that little string tie and opened it up, and the first book on top is his rarest book. Only a few hundred copies were printed, and it was in mint condition. And I looked at that, and I danced a little jig. Thankfully, no videos of that survived. And I was so excited. There was 5 or 6 great books. And then I said, uh-oh, how much are they? And I looked at the invoice, and it was like $75 for the whole batch. Just to put that in perspective, that first book called Lo Ojrasca, that book is in the thousands of dollars now. So, I mean, sometimes you get lucky, but it was being proactive that set the stage for that. And then another thing that I did early on, and if you guys go back that far in collecting, I went through A.B. Bookman, and I wrote a form letter saying I'm interested in this author, and I sent it out to 71, I still remember the total, 71 booksellers. And a few replied, including one who sent me his catalog from San Francisco, a bookseller named Alan Milcrit, who ended up becoming a very good friend. He had 2 or 3 books circled in the catalog. They were modest. They were Spanish editions, the first Spanish editions I ever bought. I purchased those. But the relationship I established with him went way beyond the book purchase. He taught me a lot, and I spent quite a bit of time mentoring under his guidance. So that was the pre-internet book world, and you had to be pretty proactive. Well, everything changed in the early 90s when the internet became prominent. Hundreds of dealers began to post their stock online. And there were some early book sites that Interlock was one, and then later Abe Books. That was, of course, great if you were hunting for books, but also one thing that you could do was you could put want matches on these sites. And what that is, briefly, for you that haven't seen this or done this, say you're interested in a title of a book. You put the want match on the computer or the author, and anytime a bookseller loads online a new copy or a new book, it will notify you. So you are getting emails all the time, depending on how many wants you have out there, of books that are of possible interest. So basically the internet scouts the books for you. So it was it still is, it's still an important part of book collecting for a book collector. And so all these sites popped up, I got my want matches. And one early story that was pretty interesting and surprising, I had a want match for a book by a Mexican author named Juan Rolfo. And there was a book in 1959 published in New York by Grove Press, and it was the first translation, and it's a novel called Pedro Páramo, important book in the field, but there were 26 lettered copies, and they were all signed, so it was a real scarce item, and I knew about it, so I had a want match for that. Well, one pops up late at night, 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and a New York bookseller has it. So I, of course, emailed back, and then I called the bookseller, and I said, I'll leave a message on their machine, because I know there's a rival collector out there that he may try to get to it before me, and I want that message to be on the machine. Well, I call, the bookseller answers the phone, and I'm like, oh, hi, how are you doing? And I said, I'm interested in this book. And he says, I just sold that. And I'm like, ah. And then he says, I think I've got another copy around here somewhere. And I'm like, there's only 26 of them. He has 2 of them? Am I talking to like the remainder publisher warehouse? Sure enough, the guy I'm talking to is named Barney Rossett. He was the Grove Press publisher and founder. These were his own copies. He had decided he was going to sell some of his own library on the internet. So I had a nice chat at midnight with the Grove Press publisher, and he sold me the second copy that he had, and he was kind enough to inscribe it to me. Well, what happened to that first copy? Well, the first copy belongs to this person right here, Bill Fisher, sitting in the room. Bill and I go back a long way, 20 plus years, and so anyway, he doesn't have one inscribed by the publisher, though. Nowadays on the internet, I have hundreds of wants saved. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I have hundreds of wants that cover all of my collecting areas. eBay has become a must for, especially for ephemera items. A lot of people that used to take their books from, say, their family, they would take them to a local bookseller. Those booksellers either aren't around or they don't have access, so they sell it on eBay. It's kind of a crapshoot, but it's very important to keep your eye on eBay if you collect any area. There's a website called the Rare Book Hub It was formerly the Americana Exchange, that you can search upcoming auctions. It's a great site, so if you have an interest in an author or subject, you can search for the auctions that are coming up around the world, and it takes you right to the auction catalogs. So that provides many temptations. So, John, now I was just talking with John, this is an aside. I have like 6,000 books. He's got like 18,000 items, okay? So, but he's got a little bit of years on me. I'm going to try to catch up within the next decade or so. Anyhow, so if something comes up for sale, I usually see it in my area. That doesn't mean I'm going to get it. Bill Fisher might beat me to it, but we'll see it. And that's the big change from what it was like in the pre-internet days. There's more opportunity for an advanced collector to find material directly, or things that you would have never seen before. So most of my collection was built, one book at a time. However, I had 3 large group purchases over the years, one very recently, and I'd like to share those stories with you. The first one, back in 2002, there was an auction of the library of Frederick B. Adams. Fred Adams was the director of the Pierpont Morgan Library. He lived to be almost 100 years old, and he started actively collecting books in the 30s, and he died in like 2001. So he was friends with all the book collectors of his generation, the book dealers, and his main collections were very expensive material, Thomas Hardy, Henry James, things like that. And so the collection was at Sotheby's in London. And at the end of the auction, though, they had some group lots of his own reference material. Now remember, I like the history of the book trade, books about books, things like that. And the descriptions were brief. It would have brief descriptions that said 150 volumes. And I said, wow, then maybe there's some stuff in there. And so Julian Rhoda, who was with Bertram Rhoda Limited over in London, I knew Julian. I said, Julian, can you go over to the auction and take a look at these lots? I think I might want to bid on some. So he went over there and he calls me back. He says, Kurt, there's a lot of great stuff in there. There's letters and inscriptions and all sorts of. I said, okay. So we worked out some bids, and I was able to buy 3 lots. And these were big lots. It was maybe 500 or 600 items total. And the shipping bill was hell from London for 500 or 600 items, but they took care of it. The Rhoda has been around, that company, for a long time, the booksellers, and they ship it over, and I get a call from the receptionist at our real estate office, and we have at that time, had about 50 agents in our office, and we had a big lobby. Clients could come in and everything. Receptionist is used to seeing my book packages come in, but she goes, Kurt, your pallet of books has arrived. 20 boxes on a big wooden pallet sitting in the middle of our office lobby. And I'm at home and I'm like, uh-oh. So I make record speed down there, and luckily our office manager was not around to see this. So anyway, I went in, and it took me 2 trips with the car to get it all home. And some of the realtors, they knew about my collecting somewhat, but after that, they knew I was loco after they saw that. What is that? What is it? So, and then it was Christmas for 4 or 5 days after that as I opened all the books. One thing another really interesting experience in terms of mass purchase and just the experience itself, many of you, of course, have heard of Larry McMurtry, and he's most well known as a novelist, but Larry is also a really hardcore book collector and book dealer, and has been since his college days in the 50s. And he lives in Archer City, Texas, outside of Wichita Falls. And many of you may have been to his store there. He basically bought 3 or 4 buildings on the town square. It's a little 1-stoplight town. And he filled those buildings with hundreds of thousands of books and had his bookstore. He would buy entire collections and libraries and bookstores when they went out of business, or just, wherever he could get it. He wanted to create the big book palace out there in Texas. Well, he had that going for 20, 25 years, and he still has a reduced version of that bookstore going. However, in 2012, in the summer, he had some health issues earlier that year. I was talking with him, and he said, I don't want to leave this to my family to deal with, these hundreds of thousands of books. So he says, I decided to have an auction. And the auction was held on site. And the way it was held, there would be a range of books, say in history, 300 books, that was one lot. And so it was really geared for like dealers and to wholesale the books. And so as a collector, I wanted to go for the atmosphere more than buying anything. So I go to the auction with a good friend of mine. We drive over. We stay in the little Spur Hotel up there in Archer City, enjoying the ambiance with the oil field workers across the street at the cafe. That was quite a mix, book people and oil field workers. It was interesting. So auction's 3 days. 3 days it took. It was like almost 1,000 lots. And these lots were huge. So anyway, I meet a lot of book people. I see some friends. And then I made the mistake of registering to bid. And I'm sitting there I'm sitting in the auction, and it's August, right? And it's hot, and everybody's kind of getting drowsy, and lot 320, lot 321, and there was a whole range of Latin American literature. I mean, literally, there was like 1,000 books. It was pretty impressive. I had a lot of it already, but there was one book and one lot that I really wanted. And my friend Douglas, he likes to spend my money for me. So he says, oh, yeah, you should go for it. So I knocked down that lot. It went very reasonably. So all of a sudden, I owned 300 books to get one book. And then the next lot comes up in the same subject area, and I go, why not? And by the time I got done, the smoke clears, and I owned 700 books, and I only wanted to buy one. But it worked out good. I went through them later, and I got a bunch of good stuff. But that was just the start. The next day, the auction continues, and one of the buildings that he had all the pamphlets and ephemera, and he had a whole wall of material that was related to printing and the book trade and historical stuff, some Texas material. And boy, I really wanted that stuff. And so Douglas, again, he was so nurturing. You should buy those, Kurt. He says, we can do something with the... So anyway, I bought 3 big lots. I bought over probably 3,000 to 4,000 items. And when the smoke cleared, I was happy. We were happy. We were high-fiving, And then I said, how in the heck are we going to get this home? We had a small SUV that we drove over there, and Douglas, ever the optimist, tells me, oh, we can get all that in there. And I'm like, no way. I don't care how good of packers we are. So we called around. Every U-Haul in the entire area was gone because all these other people had gone. We're like, what are we going to do? Because you had to take the stuff. You couldn't leave it. And so we go to the Wichita Falls airport, and they have a rental car company, and they had one Ford Expedition left. So we rent the Ford Expedition. We take both vehicles. We load them to the gunwales. There was, I think, 60 boxes of material. And my wife's nodding here. She's like sitting here. She's like, yeah. Okay, so Douglas and I are driving back. And before we drive back, he goes, there's no way I can take this to my house. And I said, well, there's no way I can take this to my house. I said, we've got to get a store. We're going to get a storage unit, of course, but what are we going to do? Mom, are you there? My parents live close by. I said, Mom, Dad, we bought a few books. Could we borrow your hallway just for a few days? Mom knows what's going on. Okay. So in the middle of the night, we pull back up into Conroe. I live north of Houston. And pull up to Mom and Dad's house, and we fill 3 deep all the way down the hallway these boxes of books, and Mom just shakes her head and says, but we did put them in storage. I went through all the material. Douglas and I sat down. We had a few beers, and we sorted through all the pamphlets, kept what we wanted, and I still have some left if anybody wants any of it. But Larry McMurtry, he, just to finish that story up, he held court, so to speak, in one of his buildings, and I got to sit there and talk with him. And he's a little shy about signing books nowadays because he had so many people asking him to sign his novels and everything. But if he finds out you're a book person, he'll spend time and talk with you. And I was pretty happy because he was thrilled that I bought all those biblio pamphlets. I think he just wanted to get rid of them, but he was really happy to see they went to someone that appreciated them. Very recently, just this last year, I was able to meet for the first time in person an author named Nicholas Basbanes. Nicholas Basbanes' most famous book is A Gentle Madness. It's a history of book collecting, and it's probably the greatest work in the field. And it's a great, entertaining read if you have not read it. It's called A Gentle Madness. But he's written about 10 books most of them on biblio topics, and his background was as a journalist, investigative reporter, so he brings a little different aspect to writing. He interviews a lot of the living collectors and dealers and profiles them in Fine Books and Collections magazine. He has a column. Anyhow, he and I had shared some interests, so I emailed with him over the years, and of course had his books. Well, he was signing his new book out in California at the Pasadena/LA book fair. And so this was back in February of 2014. I met him, we talked. He was overjoyed, and I was overjoyed to say, hey, it's good to meet you. I said, can I send you some books to sign? He said, sure. We part company. About a month later, I get an email from him out of the blue, and he says, Kurt, he says, my wife and I are trying to downsize. Nick's probably in his early 70s, and he's got a lot of stuff, and they're going to get into a smaller house. So he says, would you like to buy some of my books? I emailed back, sure, why not? And he says, I have like all the books that I use for my research to write Gentle Madness, for example. I'd be willing to let those go. He says, I know you have a real strong appreciation for that material. I said, sure, do you got a list? He goes, no. I said, well, there's only one thing to do. I'm going to fly over to your house in Boston. We're gonna visit. So in April, I took a trip he lives just outside of Boston. He picks me up at the airport. We were going to eat a fancy dinner, and then I said, we don't need to do that. So we went to the local pub and had a burger and a beer. Then we went to his house. And I walk into his house, and his wife had conveniently gone to New York City to leave us alone for these few days. And he says, Kurt, he says, you can stay as long as you want. I mean, he's a really nice guy. But he says, you're not just going to buy one or two books, are you? I said, no, I don't think so. And so I go into his house, and he must have 10,000 books in there. And every room, every shelf is double stacked. You have to move them to see what's behind them. And so I start going through this stuff. It was somewhat organized. And I start making stacks on the floor. And he keeps walking around. He goes, he's getting happier and happier as he sees me build all these stacks. And so 3 days of this goes by, and we took some side trips. We went to the John Carter Brown Library and did some bookish things. Went to American Antiquarian Society, which is wonderful if you've never been there. And so now it's time to get this deal together. And I say, Nick, look him over, and I'm going to make you an offer. And he looks him over, and I make him an offer, and we come to terms real easy. I was real happy. He was happy. And then I told him, I said, look, I want you to put your name in every one of these books if it's not inscribed to you. I said, it's provenance. I mean, I want everybody to remember it's from your collection. And he goes, okay. So that night, I'd bring stacks to him, and he would sit there, and he would write his name, ownership signature in every book, and sometimes he would write a real long inscription, like this book was really important in the writing of, just wonderful. But by the time the evening ended, he goes, how many books did you buy? So I'm calling with Nicole, talking with her every evening, and she goes, how are things going? And I said, they're going really well, honey, going well. I packed the books up, 10 boxes, heavy boxes. We take them to UPS, ship them out. Then I fly back home, and I'm waiting for them to get home. And I'm really hoping my wife is not home when they get delivered. Well, you know how that goes. She's right up front, standing there when the truck pulls up. And the UPS guy, go out there, and because I know there's a lot of stuff there. And the UPS guy goes, I've been dreading this all day. I said, let me help. So we rolled those into the house. My ever-patient wife just shakes her head again, and I have all those books arranged. I made a special place for them, and that was just a wonderful experience. And since then, besides the books, getting to know and collect a living author, someone who's active, is really fun. He keeps stuff for me. He goes, you've got the best Basbania collection. Let me send you stuff. So another rewarding, fruitful moment in book collecting. Currently, what's going on for me in the book world, I'm still fairly young, but since I started so early, I feel like I've got some time to, nowadays, I've been kind of reflective on my book collecting career, avocation, and I wanted to try to give something back to the book world. And so about 3 years ago, I started a blog called American Book Collecting. It's bookcollectinghistory.com. And I post sporadically, but try to be pretty regular about it, essays related to my collections, the history of books, people that I've come across have been very interesting. For example, there's a lengthy essay about the McMurtry sale with pictures on the blog. So I would encourage any of you who are interested to see me after or go to bookcollectinghistory.com. And that's a little bit of my way of giving back. And then we were just talking, John and I, last year, I'm a co-founder of the Book Hunters Club of Houston. And my co-founder, Bill Allison, is sitting right there, and I appreciate all his efforts as well. This came about, Houston's fourth largest city. There's no book club really for rare book collectors and dealers or people that are interested in that. New York's got the Grolier Club, Caxton Club's in Chicago, LA's got the Zimmerman Club. Now this club is not quite as formal as that yet. However, the idea was to provide a forum and a meeting place where like-minded collectors and dealers and rare book librarians could get together. So last year we started this. We've got about 20 active members now, and it keeps growing every meeting. We've met at a couple collectors' homes. We've met at a bookseller's shop, Oscar Graham's shop in Houston. And then recently, just a couple weeks ago, we had an inside tour of the U of H special collections. And that was really neat to get to see a behind-the-scenes tour of how a rare book library works and how they store things and conserve things, not just seeing what they had. So again, and also I would encourage you, I'll be glad to put you on the mailing list for that. And if you happen to be in Houston anytime when we're having a meeting, let us know and you're welcome to join us. One of the things I just want to finish with, I wrote a blog post recently that was kind of a tongue-in-cheek post, but it got a lot of people responded to it and found it pretty amusing. So I thought I would read this for you. And if you're a book collector, a lot of this will sound familiar. For those of you who are not, these are signs to watch out for. You know you're a serious book collector when the insurance value of your book collection is greater than the value of your home. You will skip watching any sporting event to attend a book fair. You have a separate credit card just for book purchases. The high balance on that credit card doesn't really count. You fantasize more about books than the opposite sex. You realize you may never see that rare book again, but you can always make more money. You sell your piano to make room for another large bookcase. My wife, who has the fever as well, did that. You can't wait to get the kids out of the house so you can use their rooms for books. You quietly worry about the structural integrity of your home. You can scout bookstores all day long and forget to eat. You have a tumultuous relationship with your postman. Most of your emails you receive are want matches from book sites. Most of your day revolves around checking those want matches. You often have books sent to the office instead of your home. Book dealers send you advance catalogs. Book dealers extend you credit. Book dealers take you to lunch. Auction houses send you complimentary book catalogs. You have experienced auction fever. You can spend hours going through dealer pamphlet bins for fun. You examine the decorative books at furniture stores in hopes of a find. Guests grow silent in amazement when they walk through your book-laden home. Your master bedroom is full of books. Thank you, honey. You have bookshelves in your bedroom closets. A library space is the most important element to consider in buying a home. You fantasize about building a separate book house on the vacant lot next door. You buy the lot next door and build a separate book house. You spontaneously cheer or curse when you win or lose an eBay auction. Your vacations feature bookstores and book dealers. The perusal of a fresh bookseller catalog takes immediate priority over anything else. You spend your free time reading old bookseller catalogs. You order book jacket protectors and rolls of protective Mylar in bulk from library suppliers. Your spouse is now convinced that books are a good investment. You're a bit embarrassed to bring a guest to the house who is not a book person. You own multiple copies of your favorite rare books. When someone asks, "How are you doing?" you reply, "Very fine." You begin to believe in a book deity. And you know you're a serious book collector when that long sought after book finally arrives and time stops and the angels sing. Thank you. I have a few minutes, I guess, if anybody has any questions or anything they would like to ask, or they can see me afterwards. Oh.
What do you think the internet has done to the value of the appreciation of books?
Well, the high-end books have kept going up. I think the mid-range collectible rare books the prices have leveled off and gone down some. And the inexpensive books have gotten very inexpensive. So I think overall the prices of a lot of books have come down, but the real rare material still is showing a lot of appreciation in terms of prices.
Not to get political, but what are your comments or advice about Amazon.com?
Well,
I've sold on Amazon for a long time.
yeah.
I pay them more than I ever used.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, so obviously it's been fruitful for you if you've kept at it. Well, from what I understand, Amazon is the most visited site, has the highest book traffic site, but I don't know how much of that is brand new books versus resale. Most booksellers are on multiple sites, Abe Books, Amazon. So I think if you're a bookseller, as you know, you've got to kind of cover all your bases out there. Yeah.
Thoroughly enjoyed your talk. I can identify with every single
My condolences on that.
we have 80,000 books in our basement because we no longer have a shop that we needed a big basement. It's impossible to expand it, so we're moving.
You've also added 1,700 square feet to a house that we bought in Denver.
That's what I like to hear. Dedication.
We fully identify with this. Did you go to Larry McMurtry's last picture show theater for the barbecue?
I did. And I know you were, we haven't really formally met, but yes, I was there. And that was quite Larry McMurtry at the auction, before the auction started, that evening before, his famous book, The Last Picture Show, which was also a very famous movie, was filmed at the theater there, part of it, and he hosted a barbecue dinner and gave a talk there before, so that was something. I'm afraid to let him raise his hand here, Bill.
Well, I have an innocent question. If you've got books in your master bedroom and in your bedroom closets, what is your game plan for going from 6,000 items to 18,000 items?
The lot next door is vacant. Really? I was going to talk to John about storage issues, maybe sublet one of his distributorship, spaces. Anything else?
One more over there.
How do you catalog your items in your home so that you know where to find them?
Good question. I made a little note here, but I forgot to speak about this. I actually do catalog. My collection is 98% catalog. All the items in depth. And the only reason that is because I listened to Dorothy Sloan when I started collecting. She says, you need to keep a list if you're going to collect, because once you get a lot of items, it's hard to go back and catch up with that. So, and I like cataloging anyway. It's just what I like to do when I'm sitting around watching TV and that. So anyhow, I've got it all cataloged in a database. And then, well, as Bill's saying, I have like portions of it in alphabetical order, but then it starts to spill over and you have things in different areas. So give me a little time and I can usually locate what I want to find, but my dream is to put all the material in one big room with shelves. But yeah, so I actually do have it all cataloged, or most of it, and then if I have to find something, if it's a pamphlet, it takes me a while sometimes, but I can do that. So I encourage anyone who starts book collecting, just try to keep at least a brief list. So, anything else? I really appreciate this opportunity, and I hope you enjoyed a few book stories, but thank you again.